City University Television presents the American Theater Wing Seminars. Working in the theater. This seminar, composer lyricist.
Welcome once again to the 27th season of the American Theater Wing's Working in the Theater Seminars. These are coming to you from the new Graduate Center of the City University of New York. Today's discussion includes insights of the composers and lyricists as they bring their talents to the New York theater. We are so pleased to bring you this new seminar and hope you will enjoy and appreciate how these artists create the magic of the musical as you see it when you come to the theater. I'm Isabel Stevenson, Chairman of the Board of the American Theater Wing, and I am so pleased to now introduce our moderator for this seminar, Oscar, Emmy, and 5-time American Theater Wing Tony Award winner, the distinguished writer, Peter Stone.
For a minute, I can hardly speak. You just handed me I should have a speech to go with my 5th Tony, which I haven't done yet. Maybe that was it. I don't know. I mean, if Isabel can't give it to you, who can? That's what I want. She's the boss. This is a very distinguished panel of composers and lyricists, and I'm not supposed to give credits or anything, but most of them go so quickly. Now, they've managed to do something that has never happened in their professional life. They've split up Kander and Ebb. But here they are. This is John Kander, the composer. This is Fred Ebb over here. We'll get to him in a minute. I'm supposed to go in order. And they, of course, have done Cabaret in Chicago, which are still running. Did they ever go off? They're still running today.
I certainly hope not.
I hope not. I mean, between the original and now. And they've done everything. A Woman of the Year and Steel Pier and God knows everything. So the act. We know Susan, who is the wonderful lyricist who did Triumph of Love, and Jelly's Last Jam, and she has some really exciting projects coming up, mainly the adaptation of Moonstruck and The Night They Raided Minsky's. And she's different in one sense, and that is that, like Marvin, and unlike Fred and John, she has worked with several composers, from Julie Stein to Lucy Simon, and now Charles Strauss, and so forth. So that part we'll get into. Fred Ebb is the partner of John Kander. He's the lyricist, he's the composer. Same shows. More Tonys between them than it would keep Isabel busy. For John, over here, Hamlisch, everybody knows Marvin because Marvin is a multiple Oscar winner, a multiple Tony winner with the pictures we know. We're talking about the stage today, and that's Chorus Line, and they're playing our song. And new ones coming up, including the Sweet Smell of Success. Now, the gentleman on my far left, I have just met today, and I'm going to spend a second longer on him because to those of you who are very familiar with the theater, Don Schlitz is someone we may not know yet in the theater. I hope we will. I hope you're planning something. We'll find out that today. But this is the most influential and awarded country songwriter of the past 20 years. He's had 24 top number ones on the list, 100 in the top. Just endless amounts of Grammys, and he has been recorded by everybody in that field. And I'm going to be very interested. And he's also dropped things. Anyway, we are going to be interested to hear about that because it's a departure. Music and lyrics. A seamless partnership is, we've got here people who have worked together a long time, people who work with different people, and finally we have Don who works with himself, and they'll clean that up when I do it. But it's an interesting match to put those two things together. I remember the famous story that everybody up here knows about Mrs. Hammerstein and Mrs. Jerome Kern, who were at some sort of reception, and Mrs. Jerome Kern was introduced as the husband of the wife that her husband had written Old Man River, and Mrs. Hammerstein said no, her husband wrote da 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 da. My husband, the lyricist, wrote Old Man River. And that's in fact the case. And what's interested me about how they work together, I once worked with Richard Rodgers, and I asked him, why are the songs you wrote with Larry Hart so different in sound and in spirit and in flavor from the songs you wrote with Oscar Hammerstein? And he said, well, it's one interesting case, because with Larry Hart, I wrote the melodies first, and he said his lyrics to them. But with Oscar, he wrote the lyrics first, and then I wrote the music to those. And as a result of that, the sound came out different, and the flavor and the tone. So I'm going to start here. I'm going to ask you all in sort of the same question, and that is, how do you work, and how do you prefer to work, and have you tried it both ways? That is to say, lyrics and music.
Don't clean it up later.
I didn't mean to make news today.
That's the second thing.
I was just asking the question.
Well, with Fred and I have worked in the same way from the beginning of our collaboration. I don't really know how it came about exactly, but we have always worked primarily in the same room at the same time, improvising together, and very, very rarely has Fred ever handed me a lyric to set, and very rarely have I come in and said, here's a melodic idea I'd like you to work with. It just doesn't happen.
It's symbiotic.
Very. And it's a way of working that's worked for us and gives us pleasure. I can't necessarily recommend it to anybody else, but it's our way.
Susan?
Gosh, it depends on the composer with whom I'm working. Some composers prefer to do music first, and there again, it depends on the moment. I think if it's really a book-driven moment, or you should pardon the expression, a comedy song, it's lyric-driven, then it's generally better to start with the lyric. But when I worked with Julie Stein, in working with Charles Strauss, I find it very easy sometimes to just let them go ahead and write the music, and then I set the lyric to the music. With other people...
you don't find it limiting, having in a sense, the tempo, the prosody set out for you by the music?
Not really, because, you know, if the composer is a dramatist, which Julie certainly was, and Charles certainly is, then somehow or other it's mostly right, and then we collaborate. You know, I'll take the music and by and large set a lyric to it and at least get going with it, and then we get into the room together and iron it out. Henry Krieger prefers to have the lyric first, and that's a great luxury, but again, we get into the room together and we pull back and forth and twist. And
Henry Krieger wrote Dreamgirls, among other things,
yes.
And is a fine composer. Freddie, you know, John, you and I worked on 2 shows, and 2 scores have emerged, but I was never there during the process of writing the song. We would work out a scene and then plan where the song went, what it's about, and then I'd come back and the song was finished. And, well, at least a version of it was finished, which is how it develops. So I've never saw it happen, so I was interested to hear from John. Is it pretty much as he described it? Good. All right, now... have you ever set to his music?
I think New York, New York, the song, Johnny got the vamp first, and the general outline of it first.
At some point we'll talk about vamps, because he's one of the...
Mostly, though, it's, as we described it, though, sometimes we've stolen from you, which is...
I understand. That's a book, that's a thing we'll talk about at some point, about how much comes from the actual scenes and how it goes on. Marvin, I know that you have sort of, at the moment, sort of formed an alliance with Craig Cornelius,
Right.
who's a marvelous lyricist, although you have worked with Ed Kleban,
Right.
and you've worked also with Carol Sager and others. Have you worked both ways, that is to say, or is it one way?
If I'm writing a song for the theater, that I much prefer, the process that I like, is that myself and the lyricist are together, we're looking at the scene, and we come up with a notion of what the song is going to be. And hopefully with it comes a title, a something to hang your hat on. And at that point, I prefer to write music first, only because I've found that when I try it the other way, it's not very successful. I just don't get into it. I find it amazing when you talked about, for instance, the way Oscar Hammerstein and Rodgers wrote. I mean, I know for a fact that that Hammerstein brought in the entire lyrics of Oklahoma and said, "Here, do it." And I know I could never do that. It's not within my ability to do that.
Well, because the songs have been written already.
Well, that's true. Yeah. You know, Arizona maybe I could have done it. But however, where I would change that method would be if you were not writing for a theater. For instance, if you were writing, like, because you mentioned Carol Sager, and Carol Sager and I used to write a lot for the charts. If you're writing, quote, for not the theater, where you're trying to be very, very much part of the book, very much trying to tell a story and continue the story, that's one thing. If you're trying to write, quote, a hook song, a song that's got the hook, sometimes lyrics first is a very, very good idea. So, you know, I would say, listen, it has to work for you as a writer. It has to be whatever way you prefer to write. For me, I like to write first with some sort of an idea of what the song is about, and then start.
When you do the theme of a film, like The Way They Were, that's more like a song for the charts, or is that more in the...
The Way We Were was a real hybrid because, you know, it's very interesting. What you always hear from the director and the producer of a film is, I want this piece of music to be absolutely correct, I want it to be right for the film, and I want it to absolutely stay in context with the film. What you're hearing from the record company and the studio is, if this isn't a hit, your name is mud. You know what I mean? So, I mean, you're listening to both sides at the same time. You've got to be true to the film always. And but again, we were very lucky. I mean, here, The Way We Were, for instance, is a good example. That title came with the film.
Of course.
So, I mean, right off the bat, I mean, you're starting off with something very, very strong.
Don, now when you sit down with yourself, which do you work at it? At an instrument particularly? Are you a piano or guitar?
I write on guitar.
Guitar.
And seated with a legal pad in front of me or a computer, and do both at the same time. But in reading Hammerstein essays, he said he would always work with a working melody in his head. And I tend to start with the lyrics, but with a working melody going the whole time. Now, for years and years, I've written with other songwriters in Nashville, virtually always who were also composers and lyricists, and we would play off of each other both ways. But when in writing for the theater, I've been working by myself, and it is I tend to start with the source, what's supposed to happen there, go for the conversational lyric idea, but work with a working melody. And upon completion of that draft, you go back, and I go back by myself and write a new melody, at which point the words aren't good enough, so I have to call the lyricist in to go back and fix the words. And
tell us, just because we're less familiar with your background, where are you from and where do you live?
I'm originally from Durham, North Carolina, but when I was 20 years old, I I bravely dropped out of my third freshman semester of Duke University and took my $80 and went to Nashville. And I've lived in Nashville since 1973. I was very fortunate to have after a brief 4.5-year stay there, my first song was recorded. It was a song called The Gambler that Kenny Rodgers cut, and later I had a lot of success with Randy Travis, Mary Chapin Carpenter, Alison Krauss, the Judds, and a lot of people who are household names, while I, thank God, have not become one. I came to a seminar in Nashville that some great theater people, Mike Ockrent, Michael David, Maury Yeston, Freddie Gershon came down and did to basically recruit people to write for the theater. And Mike Ockrent gathered some of us up and said, let's go off and let me teach you about this.
Well, that was really my next question to you. And
So I interrupted you even before you spoke.
No, which is really, that's right.
That's tough to do to a book writer.
Yeah, it is. not when you're with composers and lyricists. No, but the fact is that, so you are interested in the theater. We've not really had a great country, or what do you consider as a country Western
song,
or
country
bluegrass?
songwriter. Yeah, we call it country song. I'm a country, but my base is country songwriter, but I've been studying theater for 10 years. I'm married to a wonderful actress, dramaturge, and so I'm surrounded by theater and have been for years and years, and have fallen in with good folk.
Well, the song, The Gambler, I mean, there are stories. I mean, a lot of your songs are stories in themselves. I
Yes,
mean, more
they are.
so than, you know, most theater songs are part of a story. You have only that vehicle to tell the whole story with.
Well,
Like
the chronology is different.
The Gambler is a story.
You know, instead of working under a time frame of 3.5 minutes, to in which case there are often births, deaths, and everything that goes on in between that 3.5 minutes. It's you're stretched out to 2 hours and 15 minutes, or an hour and 45 minutes after they cut all the bad songs. So it's you have to take every little aspect, and you also get to expand on different characters, and not just instead of in the song saying this happened and this happened and this happened. The dramatist is doing that. The book writer is making all that happen. The source material, he's taking that or she's taking that and making it happen. And it's my job to, or our jobs, to express the moments and to take the moments, and at the same time to move the story forward. Writing for country music has been a great learning ground for me, because the point of a country song is to write conversationally. That it could be something that someone will say to someone else. And so the transition to the theater was fairly easy. All I had to do was stop writing about stuff that happened to me in high school and start writing from source material.
Some of those songs are almost could be expanded into a full show. Like I think of the Ode to Billy Joe. What was it?
Great song.
You see,
Ode to Billy Joe.
That's an entire play in that song.
Absolutely.
It's quite wonderful, really, because it's got surprise. It has a first, second, and third act. It has characters. It's really quite a wonderful thing.
Peter,
Yes.
can I ask a quick question? What made Nashville the heart of country music, such as Broadway is the heart of the theater?
There was. I would believe that was where the records were originally made. They could have been. A lot of it was happening in East Tennessee. If you take what country music has amalgamated on its way to becoming what we think of as this huge business, it's taken over bluegrass, it's taken over folk music, is not taken. It's amalgamated bluegrass, it's amalgamated folk music, it's amalgamated blues. It's also along the way taken on rock and roll, heavy metal, you name it. Along the way, it becomes this huge mass of material called country music, which is Nashville was a central area.
Was it Central first, or did Grand Ole Opry? Which was first?
Grand Ole Opry had a lot to do with it. The Bradley family had a lot to do with it. The Carter family had a great deal to do with where they were, and it's where they first decided to build those first studios. And it was like the reason that I went to Nashville. I had $80, and I couldn't afford to go to New York or Los Angeles. So that's, I think, how it happened.
Before we get into general conversation, which I know they prefer we do here, I want to let's catch up on some of the other on the backstories. How did you two get together?
We were both signed to a publisher named Tommy Volando separately, and this is a really simple story. Tommy said, "I think you two guys should meet each other. I think you'd like each other," and so we did, and we wrote.
He was a genius.
And that was
But you're from Kansas City.
definitely.
And you're from New York City. It's not much difference there. It's, you know, it's, and that was how Tommy just put you two together.
He somehow or other sensed that our different strengths and different weaknesses would probably coalesce into one good writer.
what preparation had you as a musician? What had you gone through before that happened? What sort of training and education?
Well, I've been playing the piano since I was about 4, and I studied while I was going to high school, and then I went to Oberlin. This is this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
I went to Oberlin and graduated from there, and then got a master's at Columbia. But I was always I've been writing since I was a little kid.
And what brought theater to the fore rather than, say, writing songs, or just individual songs, or writing classically or whatever?
Partly, I guess, because I fell in love with the theater from the time I was a little kid, and I fell in love with opera. The idea, listening to those Saturday broadcasts, somehow or other implanted the idea that music telling a story was about the most exciting thing that you can be involved with. And I've been stuck with it ever since.
Well, fortunately. And Susan, you're from where?
New York.
And you
Born and bred.
And you became a lyricist how?
In a very strange way. I wanted to be an actress and singer. From the moment I set foot on a stage, I just said, so this is who I am, and loved the theater more than anything. But the audition process was too frightening, so I stopped. And I married the first time when I was very, very young. I was still in school. And so I just retreated into being a mommy, a wife and a mother, and had 4 children, and always wrote just for fun. And
what did you write?
Well, I would write little things for children to do. I mean, I was a school teacher for 2 minutes, and I wrote, and I taught a class of educable retarded children, as they were called at that time. And I wrote a version of Snow White for them, book, music, and lyrics. And didn't think much of it. And my ex-husband was running a summer theater in Hyannis. And somebody came up to me and said, "You're a musician, can you write a score for Rumpelstiltskin by Tuesday?" And I thought, why not? So I went to the beach with the kids, and I did. And
a hard rhyme. Must have been the first challenge, actually.
But I'll cut this really short. Somebody was on a plane and sitting next to a producer who asked for a tape of this, and all of a sudden I got a letter in the mail, and so there it was.
Here you are.
Here I am.
Did you write distinguished person on a panel?
I never did.
Never did?
Never did.
Never wrote Rumpelstiltskin.
I did write it. I never rhymed it.
Oh, never rhymed it. Well,
no, it came at the end of the phrase.
I love somebody's, there are certain words that are never, ever rhymable, and someone said to somebody who was not in the business, there are certain words, he said, like what? And he said, well, orange. He said, that's one of those words. And the other guy said, that's no problem. I can rhyme orange. Orange, porrange, lorange, corn. What said to you, you're a lyricist? When and at what point in your life?
I don't know. I mean, you couldn't study it in school, or I would have. I love theater. I used to go and see everything, and I knew every song from every show. And it's what I wanted, except I knew I didn't have any composing skill. So I went out with a girl. Her name was Patsy Vamus. And I said, I'd like to be a lyric writer, but I don't know a composer. She said, I do. I'm dating one. His name is Phil Springer. And I can arrange for you to meet him. And so this is the Reader's Digest version. I went over and I met Phil, and he played me a song with a cigarette hanging out of his mouth. And I thought, this is great. And he said, nobody has ever been able to set this particular melody. And I thought, oh, God, please help me set it. And he had written with Dick Adler.
You're right.
And
Adler, who
woman.
wrote Pajama Game and Damn
Yeah,
Yankees, right?
and a woman named Joan Javits, who was very clever and wrote Santa Baby, a song I love. And I sat behind that guy, and he played it over and over and over, and I wrote my head off. And I said, oh, God, please let him like it. And I put it up in front of him, and he, boom, boom, and he played it, and he said, you're good.
And that was...
Yeah.
What was the
And,
name of the song, Freddie?
I Never Loved Him Anyhow.
Good
I
time.
love Freddie's I love Freddie's side.
And the last line was, well, anyhow, not much. And I thought it was okay. I mean, I didn't know. The fact that he approved of me, and he was a professional.
How old were you?
Oh, maybe 23, 24. I was already well on my way to being nobody, and I didn't know what I wanted or how I would do it. I just knew I loved it. And I just figured somebody walked in the room that night and said, do it. And I did it, and he approved of me, and I met him every day of my life, from 10 to 6 at night. And we wrote pop songs. And the first year we made $80. And I was working as a credit authorizer for Ludwig Bauman. And I bronzed baby shoes. And I did everything in the world. And I was writing. And I was happy. And that's how it started. And then he left me, and he got a paying job somewhere. And then eventually I met John.
Tommy put you together with John.
And
Well-
that changed my whole life.
And it's interesting that that more lyricists say that they don't know how to compose than composers do who say they can write lyrics.
Yeah. Well,
But,
he can.
yeah,
Actually.
I'm sure. Well,
No, he's really good.
Freddie's got rhythm.
yeah.
He really does.
Marvin, you started out, I know, as a musician. You were probably about 9 months old. What?
I was, it was interesting. I was at the Juilliard School of Music starting out at the age of 6.5 and going to school at PS9, but doing exactly what you said before, which was going to shows and just loving them. But I remember in those days, what was wonderful was you could stand, you had standing room for $1 a quarter, or
55 cents.
75 cents.
Yeah.
I mean, it was the kind of thing you could do, and you could do, you know, beautifully. I mean, you know, My Fair Lady could open, and 3 days later you could be standing and seeing it. Boom, you know. And I remember particularly in the 5th grade, I had done something pretty well in 5th grade, and they gave me the LP of My Fair Lady. You know, that was my prize. So I fell in love with this stuff, and I also, just parenthetically, just saying about today, the difference is that when I was going to school, something would open up on Broadway, right? You'd read the New York Times or whatever, or in those days, the 7 papers, you'd find out what was happening. But on Sunday night, you'd have Ed Sullivan's show, who would immediately bring on Enzio Pinza, who would now sing Some Enchanted Evening. And you, sitting at home, if you had, you know, you didn't need an ad like they need now, you know, a television ad. You just saw that on that show, right? And you went, wow, I got to see this show. You know. So I fell in love with that whole thing. What happened to me was that I always felt at the age of 16 I could have done it. I really felt that way. But no one was saying, here's $1 million, kid, write a show. So I had to do a kind of a different route to get to where I always wanted to get to, which was Broadway, which was I literally, you know, went from one thing to another and finally landed a movie because I was at the party of a certain producer, and one thing led to another. So I was out there in Hollywood and having a wonderful career, basically, but in my heart saying, this is not exactly what I'd like to be doing. So it was very exciting to then finally be able to do a Broadway show because, my father used to say about New York City, he used to say, because he was from Vienna, he used to say that New York is a disease, and once you caught the disease, you were hooked. I think it's very true about Broadway, and that's why it's so thrilling to have someone like this fellow over here who is from Nashville, comes from that country world, and is now hooked. Because it's something that you have to really love to do it. Because to write a show, everyone thinks is the easiest thing in the world. Then to put it on, you think, oh, that's a piece of cake. And then when you have a hit, wow. For all of those moments, there are those other moments where the show never happens, the show is a bomb, all those other things that you live with that you don't put in your bio, because your bio only tells you the good stuff. And I love, the easiest way to get out of funk is read your bio. Because if you read your bio, you only read the good stuff. You know, it's wonderful.
You brought up something that I think we're going to be talking about. But you left something out, and you left it out, and I think it's important for both of you. You were both rehearsal pianists.
Yes, right.
Both
Yep.
of you. And both
I
with
still
big-
am, I think.
I know, but I mean, you were a rehearsal pianist.
No, but that was not a joke. In my head, I am still a rehearsal pianist, and it's when rehearsals start, it's very hard to get
But
the
shows
keyboard
that
off my fingers.
You were a rehearsal pianist at some wonderful shows.
Oh.
And so were you. I mean, you were Julie, and
Julie.
you were. And what are some of the shows you were there for?
A fly on the wall, really. Well, I rehearsed and did the dance music for Gypsy and for Irma La Douce, and those were probably the best learning experiences I could possibly have had.
Yeah.
Because there you are, you're hearing and seeing
Right.
everything.
Well, you know, the show that I did particularly was Funny Girl, and what I remember about Funny Girl was it was basically not a hit out of town. We were in a lot of trouble. And watching people, you know, that's the thing that you learn. It's watching how you solve it, and if it can be solved also, you know what I mean? And, I mean, to be honest with you, he's being very modest because his work is legendary when it comes to the dance music that he wrote. I mean, it's just absolutely thrilling. I mean, you listen to Gypsy, and to be that good, to make it sound like the composer wrote it, that's the beauty of it. That's the killer, you know?
Thank you, but one of the things that you said is absolutely right, and particularly from our point of view as rehearsal pianists, because you're not there at the meetings when all these momentous decisions are made. So you have a disaster on Thursday night, and on Friday at rehearsal, a whole other trunk full of work comes your way, and you have no idea how they arrived at those decisions.
But it's interesting because you worked with Julie Stein, you worked with Julie Stein, I worked with Julie Stein, so did Marvin. There are certain people I know that who are really influential, and Broadway is one of those things, especially musical theater. People say right from Chicago or from Minneapolis or from Seattle and say, well, I'm doing musical theater. It's very hard to do musical theater without coming to New York. It's one of those few things that you learn by observing and doing, and there's certain people who are really, I mean, Frank Lesser was, you know, told everything about the business. He knew how to do it. And I get a feeling that the new people coming along aren't well grounded in the old musical theater.
Well, it's much, much harder. I mean, we really were spoiled because there were lots and lots of productions. You could, if a show closed, you could get a job going to something else. For new composers today, it's murder.
I wanted to ask Don that if theater came into your life there, I mean, while you were in Nashville, I mean, it came into your head from listening, from hearing. Did you come to New York?
No, well, I still live in Nashville, but when Mike Ockrent introduced me to Ken Ludwig, who is the wonderful playwright who had written the book for Crazy for You, had written Lend Me a Tenor, Moon Over Buffalo, and he said, well, go see my friend Ken in Washington. I called Ken. He'd never, I think, heard a country song in his life. But I
a lawyer
told him,
by trade.
I refer to him as a former law student because he doesn't like to be called a lawyer anymore. He said, we'll never find anything to write about. But come up and we'll talk. So go up, have a dinner. He assures me we'll never find anything to write about. Next morning, 20 minutes into meetings, to sitting and talking, we're talking about Mark Twain and having studied what has worked and hasn't worked. He says, well, you know, there's Tom Sawyer, and I said, it's never been a hit. And he comes like this far out of his seat and says, that's it. And so I've had a 4.5-year intense one-on-one personal class from Ken Ludwig on how to write for the theater, and he sent me directly to My Fair Lady, directly to Rodgers and Hammerstein, directly to the people who are also here today who must be just shaking their boots to be sitting here with such a big country songwriter, and had me study and study and study, and my wife as well, who was an actress, and that was musical theater was her first love, and Polly pushed me and showed me what to study, but it was It's a great learning experience, but yeah, you've got to be present to win.
One of the things, just to interject something here, I've been listening over last weekend to a collection of CDs of sort of the history of Broadway. And in 1917, Jerome Kern opened 4 musicals on Broadway. And in 1918, he opened 2 more. And what's weird about that is that that wasn't even unusual. And what has developed in the theater to this point is that now, for all of us, from the time of starting to write a musical till the time it's produced, is years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's true. I think that the great 4 or 5, including Gershwin, and Cole Porter, and Rodgers, and I think they saw themselves basically at that time songwriters. Irving Berlin, they were songwriters. That's, you know, they weren't, and the books were so simple, really, very simple. They were just glue to put the songs together. And it wasn't until Oscar really invented the modern book, which he did, that changed. It also made it harder to get a show on because there were a play now and there were characters, and that meant, you know, I have no doubt that those shows then went out of town or didn't go out of town. There was no trouble. The songs were great. They may have cut one that the audience didn't like and put another one in. But we're going to get to out of town in a minute. So, however,
as writing for into the country genre or the popular genre, would normally write 120, 140 songs a year, which translates, if you group them all together, into quite a few shows. It was not a real extraordinary effort work-wise for me. It's just meant getting up and going in and working for 4 or 5 hours every day. Which is fine, and I got weekends off, so that was the plus. But once you get to the book, it's always the book writer that slows you down, and because they insist on having something to do with the story, which is
I was interested in all of the obituaries for Steve Allen, that the man wrote 5,000 songs, and which I've no doubt that he did, and some of them we know and are quite good, but it wasn't. It would have been 11 songs if he'd written for the theater. That's the way. Yes.
When you write a book for a play, what directions do you give to your composer or lyricist?
Well, you don't. One thing, you don't direct them, and that's the first thing. There are several ways, and I'll keep this very short because it's about music lyrics. Although they're wed in such a way now, it's a collaboration, and the collaboration is very much like a marriage. You really do bond, and you during that time you live together, and you go through all of the things that you would go in making a relationship work. And one of those things is to share. You argue, you do, but there's 3 ways to do a book with a show, and one is to write the book and turn it over, just like it is with a song and lyrics, whatever. Turn over the thing, which is not a very good way. I've done it, and the other is to have a full score and sit down and try to put a book to it, which I've also done. It worked out all right in one case, but it's hard. But the way that John and Fred and I have worked, and the way I've worked, sort of the first time I did it was with them on Woman of the Year, and subsequently I've insisted on every show I've done, is that you work simultaneously. And you sit down and you plot it out. I know that today people don't like outlining and having that because it's hard, and they'd rather get to the fun part. Outline it scene by scene, and then every scene, what's it about, what's the song about, and where does it go? And then you go off by yourselves and do your work, and you come back together again.
Right.
That way you can tell what kind of song you need to write where, too. You have the arc of the show, and you know that you don't want to put 4 ballads back to back, and you need to know where the tension is, and unless you were working closely with the book writer, the composer and lyricist doesn't know where to go.
But it's also about...
it just solves the other problem that we mentioned, which is that book writers are very sensitive to writing a scene and then having it taken to make a song, including the thought and the whole idea, because usually the song is the meat part of the scene. I mean, it's the emotional part. But Frank Leslie said, how do you, I went to him my first show, I said, how do you know where a song goes? And he said, when they can't speak anymore, they have to use interjections. Oh, ah, e. That's why so many good theater songs begin with, you know, oh, what a beautiful morning. It's because you've run, you move to poetry. But that's usually the best part. So if the author doesn't have to, if the book writer doesn't have to write that in the first place, he doesn't mind losing it. So you say, where's the moment? That's the moment. All right, take care of it, and I won't do it. That's not to say it doesn't come up in other places, but that's the best way of handling it.
But why do you choose John instead of Marvin to write your music?
Well, you don't make that choice that way. You end up. It's like John and Fred ended up together. It's a matter of chance. What brought all of us, including you, Isabel, to here today for this symposium? I'm thinking about a show about that Fort Taken that brought us, the six of us together, you know, seven of us together to this symposium. It's fascinating. That's why I wanted to know where you all started.
I will say, I think, and I see if you agree with this, there's been a change in theater, a major change, possibly starting with the British invasion. I don't know how long it's going to stay or whatever, but we had for a while these through-composed shows, which to me drove me crazy because I really didn't want people to start singing about, you know, I want some water, how was your daughter, how's the thing, you know, I mean, it's just like, it went on and on. Now, it's interesting, when you see a revival, and you see what the old type show was, we're kind of out of that too. We've kind of grown past that, about the little book with the wonderful, great songs, one after the other. And yet, where the pendulum swung got a little bit too crazy, because when you talk about the book, I used to love going to shows, I mean, what I call the great shows, I mean, the ones, you know, like the My Fair Ladies, the Fiddler on the Roof, the West Side Story, where not only did you have these great melodies and lyrics, but there would be a scene, or there'd be a sentence, or there'd be a moment, forgetting the music and lyrics, that you remembered, that you went, when that person said blah, 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 you know, you just went, whoa. And I think it's very important, for instance, when I'm writing now, I like the idea that, yes, if I needed to take something from the book, if I said this is going to be a great song, I've got to take it. You've got to have a book writer who says, it's okay, I can live with that. On the other hand, I'm one of the few writers who goes, I love this so much I don't want to touch this. This is better spoken than it will ever be sung. I've always felt that some of these through-composed shows are through-composed because the books are not very good, and I have noticed in the theater that people don't cough during songs. People tend to cough during scenes. So if you keep singing the whole time, the chances are you eradicate, you know, but really, I mean this sincerely. And I got upset personally because I would go to these shows and I'd say, this is not the real thing. This is a hybrid, but this is not what really Broadway should be about. It should be the combination that should be thrilling.
I absolutely agree with you. And the through-composed show, for the most part, also drives me crazy for a number of reasons, not the least of which is being an opera lover, it seems like such fake opera to me.
Exactly.
And sometimes I think a show is through-composed because the creators think it's, quote, artistic.
Right.
And the fact is, it's just writing. It's just typewriting.
I agree with that. Although I have to say that with the miking of singers and the orchestra, that's why you don't hear the coughing during songs. All right, now, it's there. No, I'm just kidding.
I wanted to say one thing about Peter as a collaborator, and that is when we work together, usually at Fred's kitchen table, and we're working on a scene, he will get us up to the point where music is called for and be so generative in the discussion that by the time he leaves, Freddie and I are pretty clear about what we are to do. One other person who is a wonderful collaborator in a different way is Terrence Mcnally, who will write he'll write 5 pages, knowing full well that we're going to take those 5 pages and musicalize it. But that's his way of generating us.
Well, I think that's it's important to do that, but I think there are things that a book writer has to learn as well if he's going to do this. One is that you've got 1 hour to tell 2 hours of story. Because the score, no matter what, is not supposed to tell the story. I mean, you'll find book songs that will do it, but mostly it's emotional and it's involved relationships and so forth. But so you have to be very economic. The other is, and this is something Lesser made very clear, and that is the lead-in to a song. Songs used to have, in many cases during the old days, their own lead-in called the verse, which changed the level of the speech from prose to poetry. The good verses brought you up to a poetic way of speaking, but you don't have verses much anymore, and so the book does that, and it always should have done it, and that is it has to bridge the gap, because when they start singing, they're very poetic, and when they've been talking just before, they're quite prosaic, and you have to present something in the middle that lifts you from the one element to the other.
Sometimes it's a combination.
I think the most successful comedy song that I can remember that Johnny and I wrote is The Grass Is Always Greener from Woman of the Year. Were it not for the 4 or 5 minute scene that precedes it and the solid laughs you got for this character who was this unforgettable
Drudge.
sort of gnome-like lady, Marilyn Cooper, the song couldn't have worked, nor could we have scored as heavily as we did without that libretto, without your words. And I think that we have to be the continuation of the speech. I don't think it goes to poetry at all.
I agree, but I think that you are into both rhythm and poetry, and it has to somehow can't jar with it. That's really all I'm saying.
I mean, it couldn't be more prosaic.
That song, Comedy Numbers, it's true. Although that went through an amazing genesis, because we started auditioning women for that part. It was a different scene, and nobody was any good, including the woman we hired who won the Tony for it. Everybody was terrible. And I said, I'm running out of, nobody's doing this right. And the director said to me, look, when they're all bad, it's not their fault. They're professionals. The scene's no good. And I went back and redid the scene, and immediately they were playing it. That's the sort of thing.
No,
that's it.
One of the things that happens when you get a chance to go out of town, which is harder and harder, or get a chance to work in front of an audience a long time before the critics come in, you find that that song in the second act never really works. And so for a long time you attack the song, you'll rewrite it, it still never works, until it dawns on somebody that the reason that song in the second act doesn't work is because something didn't happen in the first act to prepare us for it. And the perfect example, of course, though, is in that one scene, as Fred said.
Well, you bring us around to the 11 o'clock number, which is how you build to it. And that's your big song, Rose's Turn, or whatever it is. That's the big number you come to. It's called 11 o'clock. It's really at 10:30 now, because theater curtains used to go up at 8:30. But that number is, you've all written them, and you know what that is, that last song as opposed to the first. And you're quite right. If it doesn't work, the tendency of producers says, throw the song and get another song. But if you look at the clock and the 11 o'clock number comes and it's 11:30, that may be why it doesn't work. You haven't cut, it's too late. Cut your show and then see if it doesn't work. Then if it doesn't work, look at what comes before it. Maybe it's redundant. Maybe the scene has just done it. Or maybe another song you have earlier did it. Or as John says, maybe something in Act 1 should have prepared you for it. But before you throw out, these people are professionals. And when they write a song like that, you've got to look at everything else before you dare remove that song for something else, because it's not the song's fault.
It may be in the wrong place.
Should be about 8:45.
8:45. I have found in working on Tom Sawyer with the great collaborators that I'm working with Ken and with Scott Ellis and Paul Gimignani, that the person who's probably cut more songs than anybody else is me. I love what Cole Porter said, song's not working, I'll write you another one. No problem. As opposed to sitting around and trying to rewrite the same song 20 times. If you have to do that, write another song. because it's
You
not
mentioned-
accomplishing what
you
it's
mentioned
doing.
Gemignani, and that's interesting because this is the musical director, the conductor, but the musical director, and he certainly has been there through it all. I mean, of all the people you're working with, and we've all worked with Scott Ellis and are going to again, Gemignani has seen everything.
He's seen it all.
Talk about that. Talk about the people you work with. That is to say, the musical conductor, the arranger, the orchestrator, the you know, and that sort of thing.
About Gemignani, one thing, when Mike Cochran and Susan Stroman first brought me into a rehearsal of Christmas Carol, this fellow was over playing drums, and he walks over to me and whispers in my ear, "You just write the songs, we'll do the rest." And has been with me on Tom Sawyer all the way through, and what an angel. And that is, for me, guys, I'm probably the only person here that doesn't read music. I write a number system that is that we use in Nashville, but to have someone like Paul Gemignani take and expand on just the songs that I wrote, and the book writer teach me how to go through the arc of the show.
You know what I don't
amazing.
agree with about writing another one?
Okay.
I wrote with John a song called Class for Chicago, and I hated it. It scared the life out of me, and I didn't even want to see it. And when we did a backers sort of run-through, I wouldn't play it, I wouldn't sing it, I didn't want to perform it. Johnny said, "It's funny, leave it in." And no, I don't like it. Well, we opened with it. And now it's the opening night, and where were we, Boston?
Philadelphia forever.
Philadelphia. And now up comes Cheetah Rivera and Mary McCartney, and Class is going to start. I leave. And I start going to the men's room, because it was downstairs, and I'm running down the stairs, and I don't want to hear it. And then you hear a little bit here. Maybe that's a laugh, I thought. So now I come up with now I heard a big one. Now I'm up. And I'm in there, and the number was terrific. And I thought, a day before, a week before, a month before, I would have taken that out. I would have said, "I'll write you another one," because I would have. But you need other people's faith.
Yeah,
Well, especially with comedy.
together.
I would say, you know, arguably you're the best comedy. You write the best comedy lyrics of anybody in the business, and it's remarkable, the jokes. To get jokes in a song is really hard, harder than anything. And he comes up with great jokes, and until you hear an audience react to it, you don't know. It's like the book. It's like the book. You write a joke, you don't know that it's funny. You think it's funny, or you don't, until an audience reacts, and then you know. And that's what happened in that case.
Yeah, but you just maybe think about something, and usually when I say, "Okay, let's cut it, we'll write another one," for some reason nobody tends to disagree with me, so I guess I get the collaborative
I'll tell you one thing
approval.
about Nashville. I once did a movie down in Nashville. I had to go down to Nashville for a movie to record. I'll never forget it. I walk in with all this music and everything like that, with the band and everything like that. I give out the music, and they all go, "We don't read." I go, "Okay, let's try it another way."
They got it right, didn't
But,
they?
oh, they always get it right. They always get it right.
You did yellow, red.
Yeah, right, exactly.
So set up the thing in the piano.
I would just tell you one thing. I'd just like to add to what you said, because particularly with comedy songs, obviously you need an audience. I think the thing that's gotten for me, the thing that I don't know if it's good, bad, or indifferent, was you talked about Jerome Kern going out doing 4 shows. This is before we had things like trying them out now, workshops. You know, we have now these workshops, which on one hand are supposedly wonderful because they give the creator, which I think is good, a chance to try out their show, to look at it for a much less amount of money, right? To give it a try. But it's really not just that anymore. That's what it was supposed to be when it started out. Now it's really a chance for the producer to tell you if he likes your work in progress. And that's a whole different bag. And, you know, I mean, there is nobody out there who's going to get 4 shows a year or 3 shows or 2, because given that process, that's another thing that slows up the whole thing. I mean, you know, it really does. And then, of course, now with a finite amount of theaters and a lot of shows and a lot of revivals coming in, and a lot of producers going to London and saying, well, those are the hits, so why should we worry about anything in America? Bring those over. I find it a much tougher time just to create what you want to create, you know? And it's in a way shameful because for me, Broadway is supposed to be about taking a chance. It's not supposed to be about always bringing in something that you know was a hit somewhere, so therefore we can't lose. To me, it was the roll of the dice. I don't think they knew that West Side Story was going to be West Side Story. They didn't know My Fair Lady. There was no workshop on My Fair Lady. It was what it was.
Well, the creative producer that we used to be, there used to be a lot of them, is practically non-existent.
Exactly.
And you've got, as a matter of fact, your show started off with one of the last of the great ones, even though he's got a lot of troubles.
Right.
But Garth Drabinsky was a man of enormous vision and dedication to the theater. You didn't want to necessarily invest in his shows, but that kind of active creative producer is something we don't really have.
I have a problem with that. I just couldn't work with Garth because Garth was so hands-on and made so many dicta that I found it very confining. Plus the fact that Garth believed exactly in focus group, which is what they do to motion pictures today.
Which is not a good
and bring in an audience and wire them up and see what they're reacting to. This is the audience telling you what to write.
No, that's not
I didn't like that, and I found
we
these shows degenerated.
You
didn't have that, but they certainly did on Ragtime, and they certainly did on some of the others. And you start up taking the spontaneity out of the show. But out of town, see, the good thing about Garth was he was already out of town. He was in Canada. Going out of town is a process, and it's not about going out of town, although it is. Getting out of New York is really important. But to go someplace, because musicals, I think, that are rewritten more than they're written almost. Until you put all of those elements together, you've never seen them together. Music, lyrics, sets, costumes, lighting, orchestra, all of that together. It surprises you. You've never seen it before. It's always surprising. You know, always surprising.
Just on that real quick, is the fact that I think this is more true of musicals. You would know better because you've probably seen more of these. But when you go to see these workshops and you see a play, and then the play comes in, it's very much like what you saw. But why is it that these workshops, you hear this all the time, that you loved it in workshop, you saw this musical, you loved it. It was near you, it was this, it was intimate, it was that, the two pianos were great. Then all of a sudden it goes somewhere, all of a sudden an orchestra is, you know, they get the 23...
scenery and costumes.
And the scenery, and you add all those things, and instead of them being a terrific plus, they all of a sudden turn out to be a minus sometimes.
But that used to happen all the time.
But you hear it more about musicals than any other.
The old gypsy run-throughs that we all used to go to were the same thing.
But I think it's because of
what happened to you in Boston.
It's like radio. You imagine, when you go to a workshop, you are seeing the sets and the costumes and the lighting and the orchestrations in your head. And you like it because you're doing your own stuff, you know? And then you come in and it's somebody else's and you say, gee, that's not the way I've done it.
For me, for being new in the world of theater, I found that the readings we've done in the workshops have been immeasurably helpful. Without your wealth of experience, and it is the first time that I've ever seen the process work. And so for someone who can foresee what's going to happen, I can understand not the need of it. You know, I'm also amazed that I'm in Nashville. People talk about Garth. I'm in New York. People talk about Garth.
But they're talking about Garth.
That's a different Garth. Yeah. Who knew there was more than one?
But we're coming up on our break. I think what you're saying is true. But we've forgotten to say the one thing about why these workshops were invented was to raise money. The producers use them to raise their money.
But
now
you were at the first one.
We're coming up on our break now. We're going to take a short break. And pretty soon the whole point is to have these people fighting and throwing food and hitting each other with rolled up programs. So perfect. That's what you got to look forward to. So thank you.
This is CUNY TV, the City University of New York.
Welcome back to the American Theater Wing seminar on working in the theater. Before returning to our panelists, I would like to emphasize to you that these seminars and the Tony Awards for Excellence in the Theater are only a part of the activities of the American Theatre Wing. We may be best known for these activities, but the Wing is so much more. As a not-for-profit charity that serves both theater and the community with its year-round programs, the Wing works to develop new audiences for the theater and bring theater to those who would otherwise not be exposed to its magic. Our meaningful programs for students include Introduction to Broadway, which in its 8-year history has enabled more than 80,000 New York City high school students to attend a Broadway show, many for the first time. The Wing also introduces young people to theater and to other worlds by bringing professionals into schools for workshops as a part of our Theater in School program. Additionally, the Wing's hospital program, dating back to World War II, when we created a legendary stage door canteen, continues to entertain patients in hospitals, nursing homes, aid centers, and child care facilities in the New York area. With volunteer talent from Broadway, off-Broadway, and the cabaret world, the Wing continues to bring live entertainment to those who are not able to attend theater, and our grants and scholarship program provides essential support where it is so needed. We take pride in the work we do and remain so very grateful to our members and everyone who makes the work of the American Theatre Wing possible. Our work strengthens the ties between theater and the community, and we're indeed proud to be a part of this great effort. And so now I would like to continue our program with Peter Stone moderating lyricists and composers. Peter, would you go on?
Thank you. We were going to come back and everybody sit in a different seat and you wouldn't know who was who. But we decided it this way and it would save the introductions all over again. We were talking about, let's for a second, it occurs to me suddenly, to talk about for a second the first show and how you reacted to it and how you dealt with that. Was it, in your case, was it Flora, the Red Menace?
The first one that Fred and I wrote together was Flora, the Red Menace. And it was directed by George Abbott, produced by Hal Prince, and we were sort of given the show, which was a huge, thrilling thing to happen to us. And the show was not a success. At the same time, working with Mr. Abbott, I think we would both agree, was probably worth 4 years of drama school. He was just brilliant.
And you met Liza.
And we met Liza.
With a Z.
With Liza with a Z, yes. A lot of things began then. And I think, in spite of the fact that the show was not successful, Freddie and I probably learned more from that experience than anything that's happened to us since.
And you had many with Hal Prince, at least 3 more that I can think of, maybe more.
Hal was producing then, and he was just starting to direct, and he was a big protege of Mr. Abbott as well.
Right. And your first was?
Well, my first was Working.
Right. That's the show Working.
The show Working, based on the Studs Terkel novel. And I got a phone call from Mary Rodgers, whom I did not know, who had read my lyrics.
Dick Rodgers' daughter and an author, composer herself of
Once Upon a
Mattress and so forth. So somebody.
She had read my lyrics somewhere, and she called, and I was feeding my kids, and she said, "This is Mary Rodgers, and I've been asked to be one of the writers of a new show for Broadway, and I read your lyrics, and I was wondering," and I said, "Yes." She said, "Don't you want to know what it is?" I said, "No, it's okay." It was a very strange experience because there were 5 writers, and it was full of Sturm und Drang. And Mary and I wrote many, many songs for it. We wrote songs for a family. There was a sort of storyline that held it together at first. The storyline disappeared, and there were many sorts of internal storms, and all of the writers were kept in separate corners. But I was so thrilled to be there in the first place that I I just loved every minute of it, even the terrible moments.
That show continues to be done quite a bit.
Yes.
It's one of those things that you see popping up in stock and amateur and all over the place. I know it's done a lot. Had you done a show before, John?
Yeah. It was a flop, a big flop. I did an off-Broadway, I don't know, what was it? It was like an opera. Not really, it was terrible. And it was a long time ago. We just met somebody in the hall. I mean, he's 45 if he's an hour. And he says, when he was a boy, he saw Flora the Red Menace.
I know, that's
not good, no.
John, you had a show before, Family Affair, what was that?
It was called A Family Affair
with Jim and Goldman.
With Jim and Bill Goldman. One of the things I wanted to remember about Flora the Red Menace, it's something that I think would never be able to happen in today's theatrical economy, is that a week or two before Flora opened, Hal Prince, who was the producer, came to us and said, whatever happens with Flora, the day after it opens, we'll meet at my house and we'll talk about the next show. And that next show was Cabaret.
I'm a camera.
Well, it wasn't called Cabaret at that time, but it turned out to be Cabaret.
Right.
And
I Am a Camera was the play on which it was based. The issue would...
I cannot tell you the unique good fortune of that. And when I say unique, I just can't imagine it happening in today's theater.
Right.
You'd have to, a producer would be waiting a long time to see if these guys are bankable or... And Hal took a real chance on us.
Was Chorus Line the first show?
Chorus Line was the first show, and it came about because I had worked with Michael Bennett, actually, as a rehearsal pianist and, you know, doing dance music and stuff like that. And so there I am out in California doing what I do. And what happened was very interesting because now I had an agent in California and I was actually winning awards and stuff. And you can imagine, I get this phone call from Michael who basically just says to me on the phone, I have an idea for a musical and I want you to come to New York and discuss this with me. He didn't tell me what it was or anything like that, just, you know, come. So theater is my life, so I immediately call my agent and say, by the way, now that we've won all these awards and stuff, I'm leaving. You know, this is goodbye. My agent couldn't believe it because now I was actually getting good offers for movies and I was saying, no, this is it, I'm going to New York. So I came to New York City and didn't even have an apartment. I actually went back to my parents' house to live for a couple of weeks while I was working this out with Michael. And I'll never forget, he brought me into his home, his apartment, which at that time was near City Center. I don't know if you've ever visited him, but it was...
Yes,
was
all black
and
walls.
all black. All black walls, except where he lit up, particularly the Tonys. So the Tony Awards were lit up. Isabel, this was perfect for you. It would have been a perfect ad for you. Just that's all you could see.
It made my day.
It'd make your day. God forbid if you wanted something to eat there, you wouldn't know where to go because you'd be going over Tony's. You know? And he said to me very quietly, because Michael could be very mysterious, so he said to me, got this idea. I've been talking to chorus people, this, that, and I want to do a show about them. And now you're waiting for like the middle and the end. You say, and then what? That's it. That's it. You know, that's it. So I leave him at his 55th Street on the west side. And I'm going up to my parents' house, which is on the west side. And I'm walking. I'm thinking, what meeting have I just? What have I just done? I have just given up. You know, L.A. for what? And I'll never forget my Jewish mother. Now this is for sure my Jewish mother because I remember. Okay, I walk in and my Jewish mother says, "So Marvin," because she knew how much I revered Michael. I just thought he was one of the greatest directors and choreographers. And we'd worked together. And I really loved him. He said, so tell me, what did Michael say? I said, well, he just said there's these dancers and they're going to talk about them and we're going to do a thing about them. And there was a moment pause and she says, do you want tomato with the tuna fish sandwich? But I'm done. And when you mentioned before, it was the first show really that did workshops. I mean, because to find that show, you see, I think what sometimes happens, the only thing that I would say, I mean, I haven't been asked for any advice, but I would say the only thing that I feel strongly about in these collaborations are two things. Number one, I think collaborations should feel good. You should like the person you're writing with. I mean, I've always read about how certain people never got to, you know, Gilbert and Sullivan. Life's too short, in my opinion. I think it's important, and I do think it shows in the work. I've worked with people that I really didn't love as much, and then I've met and worked with people that I really had a good time with. I think that's important. And the second thing that I think was very important, and this took me a while on Chorus Line, if you asked me on day one when I walked in on Chorus Line, which was a show in the making, we didn't have the 14 songs when we went in. We had 3 songs when we started. But if you asked me where I was on it, I wasn't anywhere as far ahead as Michael was, his vision. And eventually what has to happen in a really good collaboration is the 3 or 4 people that are working on it have to all decide that it's this road we're going down and this is where we're all going to end. Because what I think happens to a lot of shows is the music and lyric people think it's one thing.
I could not agree more.
The choreographer thinks it's something else.
Right.
That's why the director today, it's the director's medium, and that's why, if you're lucky and get a great director, or it's not even a question of a great director for that project, who sees it, and we're all seeing it. The thing about Chorus Line was slowly but surely, Michael was able for me to see it as he saw it, if you know what I'm saying. I didn't see, I have to be honest with you, I started writing and going, I don't know where this is, but on blind faith, I think Michael is a genius. I'm going. Slowly but surely, as you started to, realize what this was, we all got into it. And there was a wonderful kinetic energy to that. But that, to me, is the most important thing. It's the collaborators have to decide that they're doing the same show, whether it's a hit or it's a bomb. That's just...
Lesser had a word for it, as he always did. He called it level. You all have to be working on the same level. And now it's hard to define the word, what level. But I've done shows where all of us we're on a different level, and the show can't work that way. And yet you do shows where you're all writing the same show. With 1776, you heard that first chorus of Sit Down, John, and somehow everybody knew the level they were going to be working on, because without that... But I do agree you have to like each other, although John and Fred can't stand each other.
I know.
That's why we separated. And they seem to get along.
I want to tell you something. I have always, and Fred knows this because I have them, in great esteem, and we've worked together on things together, but I will tell you, I've always felt, to a degree, that there's something wonderful about having a partner for life. I think that is something I wish I had had, you know what I mean? Because it is the marriage. It is a marriage. It's a collaboration. And when you have a good one, like they have a great one, that makes it so much easier. Because sometimes you start working with someone, a new lyricist that comes into your life, and you realize after a while, this marriage isn't making it. It's just not happening. So I think you're both in a very enviable position.
But you found, I think, a very good combination. I think Craig is wonderful.
I'm very happy now, but I just want to tell you, it takes a long time sometimes.
And you have the advantage of liking yourself.
Sometimes I let myself down, but I never go to bed mad.
There you go.
Of course, I assume you want me to respond about my experience the first show, and since I'm sure this will be taped and watched for years and years.
This is your first show.
Well, let's just say Tom Sawyer, which opened in April of 2001,
there you go,
was a terrific experience for me. Led to a wonderful career in the theater.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget it.
And it's a hit in spite of Ben Brantley. Isn't that amazing? Anyway.
It's funny, one of the things that schools teach now teach about musical theater, and they have classes in lyric writing and playwriting and composing, but the most important thing, and then Marvin brought it up, is that word collaboration. Yeah. And I don't know if you can teach it, but there certainly is never enough stress on that in the academic world of musical theater. And collaboration is everything, absolutely everything.
It can't be taught because it's a matter of personal chemistry, and it has to do, and it just is one of those, it's kind of hit or miss until you find the right marriage, because that's really what it is. Now, you've worked with a number. Has there any...
I have had the happiest collaboration. There was only one that was unhappy.
Who?
Yeah, we want to know. Hey, this is cable. You're allowed to say anything.
And undress.
But all the rest of them, were and have been and have remained my best friends.
Who's the bad one?
When will you tell us?
We have to go back and look it up. I've had both. I've had wonderful ones. John and Fred were a dream to work with, and for a book writer. But I've had bad ones where we just couldn't get along, How
does that work? I mean, we've been very lucky in not having that. What is Tell about a bad collaboration.
Well, one of my problems. Well, go ahead, tell yours. I'll tell you a story in the
You don't
blank.
have to name names.
Tell it in the
blank.
with like a blank key.
It was one of those things. I mean, nowadays it seems that one is put into a collaboration by producers, and I wasn't wild about this notion to begin with, but I said, all right, I'll go along with it because I did like the other elements in the collaboration. I liked the book writer and the director, both of whom I met and had lunch with, and I loved them. And I liked the project. And I was the first one to discover that this person was really not a collaborator.
A man or a woman?
How many
You're just going to
syllables?
go at me.
I know who it is, and I'll tell you.
Rhymes with, sounds
Bigger
like,
than a bread box.
I'll tell you
how many
later,
syllables?
Fred.
Rhymes with Rumpelstiltskin.
But what was the
But I
experience like?
remember, well, the first time I was sort of trying to gentle him into it because
Him.
She is so clever that that's her way of throwing us off. That's how clever this woman is.
I only ever worked with one woman and I got along with her.
That's Lucy.
But yeah, she was fine.
And Mary
But
Rodgers.
he didn't, Mary, right, and I love Mary. But he didn't, the first time he was asked to do something by everybody in the room, the first time we all agreed that this moment was going to be musicalized and how it was going to be musicalized, he just said no. And then everybody explained to him why, and then we started to work again. And his way of dealing with not getting his own way was to, it's hard to describe, he would just sort of go limp and not do anything. And you know, when the producer said to me, I don't understand it, you get along with everybody, and why are you not getting along with him? And I said, well, I tried to explain it, and then, of course, the director ran into the same thing, and the other people did, and it became...
And they murdered him. And that was
No, they brought in
His
some
point
help.
is absolutely about what I've learned so far about collaboration that Ken Ludwig was teaching me for so long, is that everyone will have input.
Yeah.
And even if you can see right from the moment you first hear it that it's not what you want to do, not what you work, you say, that's very interesting, I'll think about it.
Yes.
And that actually, as flip as it may sound, that does give you time to say, wait a minute, you know, and to give you at least that much of thought. If you can avoid using absolute terms, no, that won't work. That's wrong, or whatever,
Even that,
or naming
even that
names.
you can deal with, but when everybody says, but you have, you know, but we're all trying to do this, and you're kind of going over here, can you make the adjustment and we'll come this far?
Sure.
And he just said, no, that's the way it is.
You know, sometimes I have to say that, I don't know about the two of you, but sometimes for me, we're writing a score, let's say, and I write a song, and I think it's wonderful, and then as you go past that moment, and as you learn more about these characters, and as you're working more, you go back, and all of a sudden you say, you know what? You know that song that was great in July? Well, now in October, I want to change that. Or sometimes I have to find myself where, if particularly the lyricist or the book writer or the director says to me, I want you to do this, I want it to be this way, and let's say I don't see it, I just don't see it, I may still write it because it may get us to someplace else where we all want to go. That happens more times than you want to think about. I mean, I always find that if you're writing 15 songs for a show, the chances are, even if you're writing at a terrific clip, 5 or 6 are going to find themselves out, and another 5 or 6 are going to, you know, or because you can't, at least I don't think that I know these people in the show and what I'm doing as we start in the beginning. And also, I like to write, I must say, you know, from the beginning to the end of the show. I don't like to all of a sudden go to the 11 o'clock moment. I like to know, where did I start, you know. And as these people are progressing in my head, they're also progressing on the paper. I mean, they're coming alive to me. And sometimes, many times usually, there'll be stuff and I'll just go, well, just leave that, you know, let's just hold the page there, let's keep going, but I'm coming back to that because I'm going to find something new. I mean, that happens, or the only other case I ever had that was wild for me was when Michael Bennett on Chorus Line, when I had a song that I really loved, and he said, I can't stage this. And I said to him, well, if you can't stage it, that, you know, like you said before, then it must be the, you know, it must be the scene or something. then I had to change the number because I said, Michael, if you can't stage this, who can? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that sometimes happens. I mean, so there's a lot of, you know.
Well, you know, when we were doing the night they raided Minsky's, we did a reading of the first script, and it was eminently successful, and we all went back and looked at each other and said, you know what, the character of the girl does not work. And we had to reinvent the character of the girl, the book writer, which meant we had to change the story, which meant that Charles Strauss and I had to go back and rewrite almost 90% of the score.
Oh, was he the one?
No, I wasn't really.
Darn.
There's another aspect. There's also another aspect of book writing. It was me. No, it wasn't. There's another aspect of this collaboration, which is closer to the marriage part that I keep talking about, and that is the reaction that the collaborator has when the other collaborator brings in material.
Oh, right, sure.
And let's say he brings in a song, you sit there, you're underwhelmed by it. You know, but it's like your wife brought home a new hat, you know, you hate, you know, say, take that thing off and throw it away at the peril of your life. So it's the same way. You say, well, you know, I think you can do better. You know, I liked it. Yes, it's good.
But Peter's much better than he's describing, because if he's not reacting well to a piece of material, it won't be about, that is really a crappy song. It's much more about, I think that the moment needs some other element to fulfill itself, so that by the time you finish talking to him, you feel anyhow that you know what you ought to be doing.
There's a wonderful Kaufman Hart piece called "You Can't Take It With You." No.
Well, that is one.
No, Once in a Lifetime.
Once in a Lifetime.
Yeah.
It takes place in Hollywood,
Right,
and
right.
one of the characters is a writer, and he has a lot of crossovers. And at one point, and somebody says to him, "Why are you so successful?" And he says, "Because I do the rewrites first." I always remember that. And it's kind of true.
One of the things that Fred and I have in our collaboration, and this has always been true, and we've been very lucky, if we are working on a musical moment and we have a disagreement about what direction it should go, if one of us has a real passion for a particular direction, the other one will say, well, okay, let's try it. And we do, and sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. And we're lucky because we write fast, but we throw away fast too. But we will always, each of us go with the other's passion, if there's a true passion for
Like
an
class.
idea.
Yeah. And then there's
It was his passion, not mine.
and then there's the getting along, the producer who has opinions, and you have to deal with the most remarkable occasion I know is it happened to be a film, but it was dealing with Frank Lesser again. I keep quoting him, but somehow he was doing Hans Christian Andersen, and he came in and played a new song for Sam Goldwyn, and Goldwyn says, "Well, that's very nice, Mr. Lesser, but I think you can do better." And Frank went home and wrote a whole new song, brought it in, and he said, "Well, yes, that's also nice, but I still think you can do better." And so Frank went home and he wrote a new song. He came in again, and Leslie said, "Yeah, that's also good, but I still think," he says, "No, Mr. Goldwyn, that's the best I can do." And he says, "That's what I want." In other words, he didn't know anything, but if the composer says, "All right, I can do better," but it gets to a point where he says, "That's it, that's as good as I can do."
You know, that's like a list of useless comments from producers,
Yeah.
sometimes from directors too, who will say, "I don't think you're stretching yourself
Yes.
enough.
I know.
I don't think you're challenging
that
yourself."
calls for some violence. My terrible collaboration, which was only due to the fact that there was a status difference, which was played upon, I was young, and it was a very, very famous composer.
Who?
Richard. I won't tell you his name. I won't tell you his name. I'll give you his initials. All right. Richard Rodgers. And he was also the producer of the show. Ooh. And he was always wearing the wrong hat on purpose. You'd go to him and you'd say, "Richard, I think Dick, I think we ought to do that." He said, "Well, talk to your glass. I'm the producer." And then you go in and talk about something about the producer. He says, "Well, I'm just the composer," And it was you didn't have even footing. Now, he was a perfectly nice man, I suppose, but the fact was that the difference in our status was so different. He was a legend, and I was
what we say on cable, if you could, a pisher, and there was no way that, you know, it just wasn't good because he didn't make it comfortable for me. It was his job to make it comfortable for me, and he couldn't. So it was a bad collaboration. But all the others, and I've had a lot, have all been really quite good, although no one as good as these two. It's really amazing to work with them. You never fight. You have arguments.
Yeah, lunch a lot.
But you have great breakfasts. Anyway, that's great.
For my sake, could you just tell me how New York, New York came about?
A movie?
It's really, it's my national anthem.
Well, New York, New York came about, I'll do this really quickly. There was a movie called New York, New York, and we were asked to write some songs for it. And it starred Liza Minnelli and Robert De Niro. And we wrote a song called New York, New York, which we thought was perfectly fine. And we came in and we played it for Scorsese, who was directing it, and Liza and De Niro. And we got past Liza and Scorsese just fine. And before we left, we saw De Niro over in a corner sitting on a couch with Scorsese, gesturing a lot. And the long and short of it is that Scorsese came back with great apology and said that De Niro had not liked it for a number of reasons. And we, of course, were really pissed off. Like, what is some actor doing telling us how to write a song? So anyhow, basically we said we'd take another shot at it, and we went back and in very short order wrote a song, another song called New York, New York, which is the song which we know today. And if it had not been for De Niro being a real pain in the ass, we would have never...
And if you think it's a pain in the ass, you think what it is to Betty and Adolf. All right, well, anyway, we've come to the end. They wrote the first New York. You remember, it's a hell of a town. We've come to the end of our hell of a broadcast. We really love your being here. These are all legends and one soon to be on Broadway. And as always, Isabel, thanks for the opportunity.
Oh, thank you.
And
I'm going to interrupt by saying, in all the years we've been doing these seminars, this is the most interesting and informative ones that we have done. Really, I'm so grateful.